Hilchah Shchitah Perek Chi. So we're learning the Ram said earlier in Perek Hey that there is 8 treifis. So we learned about the drusa, we learned about the kuva and the chseira and the natula, and now we're up to psuka. That's the 5th of the 8 treifis is psuka. Psuka Perek Chi. Psuka ketzad. Chut hashedra. Chut hashedra is the spinal cord. So there's the vertebrae, the bones that the spinal cord is in, and then there's the actual cord of the spinal cord. Now the cord has the skin around the cord, and then there's the marrow, so to speak. The inside this cord is called meach. Normally we think of meach inside a bone. This is not a bone, but it's a cord. But it's also there has the inside. There's the skin around the air around the chut hashedra, and then there's the meach inside the shedra. There's a psuka ketzad chut hashedra shenifsa ko'er hachefes hameach. The skin around the meach, which is in the chut hashedra, was cut. Is treifa. Bilvad sheyifsa kreva kefei. As long as knows when is it considered a treifa? If it was cut rube reva kefa, knows most of the circumference of this air, there was a cut around the air of the chut hashedra reva kefa, most of the circumference. Aval nizda ko'er la'arke, if there was a slit in the air of the chut hashedra, but it was to the length, not to the width, so therefore it didn't go around. A nikav, or there was a hole in the air of the chut hashedra, is mutaris. V'cheinem nishbara hashedra. If let's say the backbone, the spine, the bones of the spine were broken, but the chut hashedra wasn't cut. Oy shenismayach hameach shebetech hachut. Whereas the meach, the inside, what's inside the chut became soft. However, but the chut itself, in its nadin, it started moving. Because what was inside the chut started moving, but it became softer. But the oil is still intact. Hail ve'erikayim, the oil around the chut, the skin around the chut, around this spinal cord, is still kayim, as arizim muteres. However, humra chameach, v'nishpach kamayim ekadenik shnormas, knows it became completely dissolved. The moyach in the chut became completely dissolved, and it became like mamish liquid, or it became like molten wax. In other words, it can't stand straight. Because even if you hold it up, it like just falls. There's no strength to it. There's no stiffness to it. Is arizu treifa. So because then it's considered that it's completely, the inside is completely rotten, so to speak. But if the reason why it can't stand is because the weight is pulling it down, is arizu suffik, because it's not clear. It's not clear what the matzav of what's going on inside the chut is. So in other words, if it's clear that the reason why it's falling down is not because of kavdei, but because it's inside, it was nishpach kamayim mekadei, it doesn't have any strength to it, any stiffness to it. So then it's for sure treifa. But if it's a suffix, so it's a suffix treifa. Now, when you say the chut hashedra, where is the chut hashedra? Ad heichen chut hashedra. So where the tchilah saying b'chutz lapul? We mentioned from the head. So we were learning before, but again the meach, which is chayfa, the air, which is chayfa the meach. So the meach extends. In other words, the top of the neck. There is the glands on top of the neck. So over there, they're like little balls on top of the neck. So which come out of the head. So when the chut starts extending beyond those pulin, that's where the chut hashedra begins. Because until then, that's the meach. And then from the meach is nimshel, the chut hashedra. So tchilasi, the chut begins maybe chutz la pulin, outside these pulin, these little glands, shebetchilas or erif, which is in the beginning of the neck, and ad safe parsha shniya, until the second parsha. Now when he'll touch you, what the second parsha is. Shalishoyer achreo, in other words, when the point, shel parsha shlishis, hasmucha l'tchilas alya, when there's only the third parsha, which is close to the beginning of the tail, that area where the parsha shlishis, which is smucha alya, that's not already considered the chut hashedra. Now, v'shalish parsha is saying. So in other words, we're talking about The shedra extends down the back, obviously through the vertebrae in the shedra. So it knows all the bones of the shedra. That's all part of the chut shedra, which goes through these vertebrae. That's all part of the shedra. And then at the end, after that, after it finishes, so to speak, the spine, is then there's three bones, ve'elohin sholish atzamis dvukin zebazeh, which are lemata michul yishel shedra. In other words, there are another three bones which are close to each other, which are under the vertebrae of the shedra, and the shedra still extends beyond the vertebrae through the first two bones, and when it reaches the third bone, that's already doesn't have a din of a chut shedra. So if over there the oir of that chut, the chut is still extending down there, but that chut doesn't have a din of a chut shedra. So that area there was the chut was severed, the oir of the chut was severed. Even Rubei wouldn't be upsul. Is nachamol. The chut shedra, if it was nifsak, the oir Rubei, that's called a treifa. That's called a psuka. That's the psul of a psuka. Now, what is the chut shedra? The chut shedra extends from after the head. Now that means when it goes out of the two pulin, which are betchila sa'irif, and then the chut shedra extends down the entire back with all the vertebrae, which the chut shedra goes through, and then it extends into these three atzamis, and then it goes into the aliyah. So obvious. So when it goes into these two atzamis, it's still the chut shedra. When it gets into the third etzem, it's not the chut shedra anymore. And memela, so over there, if it was nifsak, it wouldn't be treifa. That's what he's saying. That's benegel behem. Chut shedra be'ef. Where's the chut shedra be'ef? Also begins from the head, and it goes down ad bein agafayim until between the wings. Avalamatimim came to say something that's under the wings or beyond the third etzem. Ein mashgichon ala chut nimshach l'sham ben shenifsakeri ben shenim rechameach. Even that part was nimra chameach, and the inside of the chut also like dissolved and became liquid, or it got cut, so it's not again. That's already not the chut hashad. Halacha hey, krua ketzad. So the sixth of the treifis is called a krua. What does it mean, krua? Now, basar hachoifes reiva keres, hu hamokim min habeten shim yikore yetze hakeres. So there's a beten and there's the keres. The beten is the stomach, which is generally the entire front of the animal, which covers not only the keres, it covers a lot more than the keres. That's all called the beten. Now, inside the animal, part of one of the stomachs was called the keres. We learned there's the chelev amchases hakeres, that there's the keres, which is one of the stomachs. Now that keres be'emes is enclosed partially with the tzlois, with the ribs, but most of it is covered by the flesh in front of the body. There's the flesh which covers the keres. There's the flesh in front of the body which covers the keres, which covers most of the keres. And why say most of the keres? Because the other part of the keres is covered by the rib cage, but most of the keres is being covered by this basar. Now, if this basar, which is in front of the keres, no, it's not the entire beten, but the basar which is in front of the keres, it'll be cut open. So then the keres could fall out, and if the keres will fall out, that'll cause the behemoth to die. So if the flesh, which is on top of the keres, which is covering the keres, will be cut, so then there's a concern that then the keres will come out, and that causes it to be a treifa. So this is what krua is. Krua ketzad basar hachoifes reiva keres. The flesh which is covering the reiva keres. The reason why it says reiva keres is because, and it's what's negay over here is because since it's covering the reiva keres, so therefore if this flesh will be torn, so therefore the keres will come out. And the reason why it's only covering the reiva keres is because the rest of the keres, the miut of the keres, is being covered by the rib cage, by the ribs. So basar hacheves reiva keres, v'hu hamokim and abeten. That's the part of the beten which is the general stomach. She'im yikara yetze hakeres, that area of the beten, where if you tear that area, the keres will come out. So it's the area right, so to speak, neged the keres. Is a nikra basar zeh. This flesh, which is connected a keres, was torn, so it's treifa. Aval pishli higia keres lekeres acheniris. It's not like you actually cut the belly open to the extent which you actually see the keres. If most of the thickness of this flesh was cut, so we could assume that it'll continue cutting and it'll actually reach the keres, and then the keres will come out. Or the flesh was taken, or reiv uvi abasa was taken, either nikra or taken, is treifa. And how long does the cut have to be? The depth of the cut has to be the majority of the thickness of the flesh. But how long does the cut have to be? So again, you have, we'll call it the belly of the behemoth, and the part of this belly is keneged hakeres, and which is keneged the roiv of the keres, because the other part of the keres, as we say, is covered by the ribs. And this part of the belly, which is covering the keres, if there's a hole, if you tear it open, and you don't tear it open completely to actually see the keres necessarily, but you tear it open, then most of the flesh, it was torn open. That most of the thickness of the flesh was torn, and now you're only left with a minority of the thickness of the flesh, and the tear was the length of a tefach. The tear was the length of a tefach, so that's considered karua, and then it's possible. Then it's a treifa. V'kam mashir akera ba'orke erech tefach. That's talking about a large behemoth. V'mhoisa behemoth ktana v'nikra reiv erech habasar hachefes hakeres. So in other words, it'll be less than a tefach, but nevertheless it'll be the roiv of the basar, which is mechasas hakeres. We're not talking about the whole animal over here. We're talking about only this part of the animal, which is the keres. We know where the keres is, and that's the second stomach, and that's erech habasa, which is cheves hakeres. Is afal pishaim be'erech hakera tefach is also treifa. Hail v'nikra ruba. So that's the din of a karua. Karua means that the belly was torn keneged hakeres. And it was, in other words, in the thickness of the tear was most of the thickness of the flesh going into the animal towards the keres, and the length of the tear. So if we're talking about a large animal, so the length of the tear is a tefach, and if we're talking about a small animal, that less than a tefach would be roiv of what's covering the keres. So then it would be roiv of what's covering the keres. And then the reason it's a treifa because the behemoth will open up and the keres will come out, and that will cause it to become a treif. Halacha vav niktar habasar hazeh beigulei beirach. In other words, the halacha hey is talking about that there was a cut, and could be no flesh is missing. There was a cut. Hashem over here we're talking about that flesh is missing. You took flesh missing, and that was keneged the mokim of keneged hakeres. Again, you took away the flesh, which was keneged hakeres. Either it was a round shape that you took it out, or oblong. It's not neger. It's neger. You took out the flesh. Now, how much flesh did you take out? Imhoya yesen mikasela. If the area of where you took out the flesh was more than a kasela, a sela. Well, how big is a sela? That 3 pits of a date would be able to go into this hole if you squeeze it in. I know there's enough room for 3 pits of a date to go in there, and that would be considered kesela, is harei zutreif. So in other words, if you took out the flesh, the size of a sela, which is connected the keres, a certain part of that stomach of the animal is harei zutreif. Why? Because the keres is not going to come out in such a small hole. Because if the hole will open up, since there's a hole, so the hole will open up and it'll be extended out, and then it'll be a tefach. And a tefach, we said before, that tefach is the size of a kera. So since there's that level of a flesh missing, so therefore there's a concern that there's a concern we namon that the keres will come out, and therefore it's called a treifa. So that's a krua. Krua means that you have a cut in the stomach connected hakeres. It's a special place in the not in the entire belly. There's a cut in the belly doesn't make it a treifa. There's a cut because we learned before the dakim were sticking out. It's not a treifa. Even if dakim came out, it's not a treifa. We're talking about over here that it's Keneged Akeres and the Shiurim, either a Tefach, the cut of a Tefach, or Tefach of Sharev Akeres. Or, and if it was Nigdar HaBasar, and actually flesh was taken out, it wasn't just cut, it was actually flesh taken out, so then it's the shear of a cell. Halacha Zayin. Behema shenifsha te'er shaleh kulei. Ben shenikra biyad ebecheli v'nimtza b'asa b'le'er. There's no air, there's no skin, there's only flesh. Is arezu treifa. V'zuhi shenikraz guluda. So behema that has no air is treifa. That's called a guluda. That's an extension of the din of krua. Krua was talking about that it was krua keneged akeres. So now we're saying that if the entire air is missing, that's called a guluda, and that's also a treifa. Now, v'im nisher min ha'er, reichav sela al pnei kol hashedra, and v'reichav sela al hatabur, and v'reichav sela al rasha ivara, is areza muteres. Now, b'amis in Gemara, there's a suffix. Which er is negeli kuva? The Rambam paskins that you need all three. So you need sai or reichav sela al kol pnei hashedra. You need a reichav sela on the tabur, on the navel area, and also a reichav sela al rasha ivara. So if you have that oir, so even though you don't have the other airs, it's also besed. It's also besed. That's Shchitah Saram. V'imnital kireichav selam yal kol pnei hashedra. Let's say it was missing. Those pnei kol hashedra, everything. Pnei kol hashedra could be matzel, but over here, on the pnei kol hashedra, there's no reichav selam. Oy me'al hatabur, or me'al hatabur is missing. Oy me'al rasha ivara. However, ushar kol ha'er kayam. Is a suffix. No, it's a suffix in Gemara Bamis. The suffix is, since we see that it's matzel, so maybe it's a svara that this makes a treifa. No, if it's missing this, no, since we see that this air is so important, that if you have the air al pnei kol hashedra, it'll be matzel the rest of the beima. So mele hu adin, if the air al pnei kol hashedra is missing, even though the air kol beima has air, so that then it's a treifa. So that's a suffix in Gemara. So the Rambam is saying that it's a suffix. And the pshat is because the Rambam, it's a svek because be'emes the Rambam is talking about that it's missing on one of them. Nachamo. In little kireichav selam me'al kol pnei hashedra, ei me'al hatabur, ei me'al rasha ivara. So in other words, you have the oil on the behemoth beseder. It's just that on the pnei kol hashedra there's no air. So mainly there's two sveikas. First of all, there's a suffix that Bechlal could be the Pnei Kol HaShedra is not Bechlal what makes it a treifa. Could be what's neged that it's al Pnei HaTabur or al Rasha Ivara, not on Pnei HaShedra. That's suffix number one. And suffix number two is that even if it is even if that's the the Iker place, and therefore if it's al Pnei Kol HaShedra, it'll be matter. But on the other end, since there's air on the entire behemoth, so that's also not a chsar. There's two tzadim leheter. There's one tzad leheter that this is not the liikuva, and there's another tzad leheter that even if it is liikuva, but since there's al pnei, there's oir al pnei kol behema, so then it's not. It doesn't make it a treifa. So the two tzadim. That's why v'yiroli shematirunes. If you have a behema that was completely taken off the oir, it's a treifa. If you have a behema that was left the oir, sai on the pnei kol hashedra kisela, and sai on the tabur kisela, and sai on the rasha ivarim kisela, it's not a treifa. Now the emes is in Gemara. There's a suffix. There's a suffix. Could be you don't need sai on the shedra and sai on the rasha ivarel and sai al pnei tabur. Could be one is enough. But on the other end, since it's a suffix, which one is the one that's enough? And not could be one is enough. It's a suffix in Gemara. Which one is the one that's negea? So memela. So since we don't know which one is the one that's negea, so therefore you have to have all three. You have to have all three to establish that it's not a treifa. If you have all three, so then it's not a treifa. That's talking about if it's missing the bechlal, and it has all three, so then we know for sure it's not a treifa. Now, what happens fakert if you have the on the rest of the behema and it's missing on these three? Now, if you have the on the rest of the behema and it's missing on these three, so then there's a suffix in Gemara. There's a suffix in Gemara whether or not missing on these is going to cause it, just like it could cause it not to be a treifa, it'll cause the behema to be a treifa. Now, if the tzad is that the one that's the one that's neged that it shouldn't be a treifa is the pnei hashedra, So then the suffix would be in the tzir where it's missing on the pnei hasheder. If the tzad is that the agapai, that the tabur, so then the suffix would be over there by the tabur. And if the suffix has been again the Rosh Ivarim, so the suffix would be Rosh Ivarim. The same one that would cause it not to be a treifa, there's a suffix. Maybe it makes it a treifa. And maybe it doesn't make it a treifa because sof called sof, it's takamatzel, but it doesn't make it a treifa. If there's al pnei kol behema, so the fact that it's missing on these areas doesn't make it a treifa. So there's two tzaddim. Now the Rambam is the paskening l'chumra that you need all three. That's a chumra because it's a suffix. Which one is the one that's negea? Now that's the chumra when everything is missing and you need all three. Now what is fakert? If everything is there, now if everything is there and all three are missing, so again it would be a suffix. Maybe it's a treifa. Masha'inkin, if everything is missing and if everything is there and only one of them is missing, either the one that's al pnei hasheder, or the one that's on the tabor, or one that's in Rosh Ivarim, so it's a svek sveka. Maybe Bechlal, there's no problem. Each one is not a problem, because that's not the one that's liikuva. And even if it is a problem, but there's another, the Chatzad and Gemara, that if there's er al pnei kula, this doesn't create a problem. It only creates a solution, not a problem. So Memela, it's a svek svek, and that's why it's Muslim. Halacha ches, nefula ketzat. So the seventh of the treifas is nefula. What's nefula? Harei shenofla behema mimokum goveya, shegoveya asoret tvachim yeser, and v'nesrasik ever meivoreo is arizu treifa. So they had this fall, and the fall was 10 tvachim. And Shulchan Aruch is brought down that it doesn't have to be 10 tvachim. In other words, that the place where we were standing was actually 10 tvachim above the ground. As long as it was 10 tvachim above the ground, from the stomach of the behemoth to the ground. So in other words, you count the legs of the behemoth also in those 10 tvachim. Ram doesn't seem to say that. Ram says, Harishanafla behemoth mimokim goveya, she goveya asarat tvachim, that the place itself is asarat tvachim taller yeser. And when the srasik evim everel, and one of the Ivarim, which the Rambam will say is the Ivarim apnimim, was shattered, harizu treifa. Now here the Rambam will say Behemshach, we're talking about that even though this Aver that was shattered is an Aver that Be'emes, even if it's a Nekuva and even if it's a Netula, it wouldn't be considered a problem. The problem is not the fact that it was shattered. The factor is that it experienced this type of a fall, which causes that one of the Ivarim, which is the Ivarim apnimim, should shatter, and that causes it to be a treifa. That's the vart. That since it fell and it caused that one of the Ivarim apnimim should become a treifa, it should become a nisrasik. That's the treifa. The Ketzad who are so what does it mean that this is nisrasik? She is reitzet to Aver. The Aver was shattered. V'yechla machmas hanafila achetiposit surasi v'tori. That this Aver became ill because of the fall, and the tzir of the Aver completely changed. Is nevertheless, nisrasik doesn't necessarily mean nikav, nizdak, or nishbar. It means it was nisretzis, it was shattered. In other words, it was smashed, harezu treifa, but not smashed in the sense that it fell apart. V'chein imhiko oisoi be'even e b'mata. And also veritzets echad mevarel, so you smashed, you shattered one of its evarim, also apnimim, through giving it a bang, is treifa. Be'eze evarim omru, be'evarim shebachalal aguf. So nachamol, the issue is over here that it fell, and it caused that one of the evarim apnimim should become nisreitzets, nisrasik, and when nisrasik means that it was nisreitzets, it was smashed, to a sense that it was lost its tsurasi v'tare. So even though we're dealing with an aver, as we'll soon see, is not an aver which be'etzim, the aver is essential, and therefore, if it would be nifsa the aver be'etzim, it wouldn't be a treifa. But on the other hand, if it had this fall and caused that this aver should be nisrasik, so that causes that the behemoth should be a treifa. Now behemoth shenaflim and agag im holcha, if it starts walking after it falls, ain't choshelo. We don't have to worry. Maybe it has this psul of nefula, and there's an aver up the pnim that was nisrasik. However, vim omdo v'leiholcha, so then choshelo. Then we are choshish, and therefore we have to be beidik, as we'll soon see. Now, kofza machmas atzma, if it jumped, is ein choishin la, even if we didn't see that it walked. In other words, even if it fell, but then it walked, we're not choishish. Masha'inkin, if it fell and then it walked, if it falls, and even if it stands up and it doesn't walk, we are choishish. Masha'inkin, if it jumps, even if we don't see it walking, kaftzamach masatzma ein choishin la. Now, and you're not really sure how it got down, is again, is ein choishin l'shem nafla. So Nachama, when it was nafla, and it didn't walk, so then it's choishin la. Masha'inkin, if it jumped, or if it walked, so ein choishin la, or if you don't know. Now, schorim hamenachim zeh behemoths that like are fighting, like bulls that are fighting with each other, bullfight, is ein choishin la, even though they're fighting with each other, but we're not choishish. Maybe it was nisrasik echem nevera. Naflu la'aretz. If one of these bulls fell to the ground, is choishin, then we are choishish. Maybe through this fall it was nisrasko echem nevera. V'chein behema shoysim megareres ragla. We see it schlepping a foot. And cheshel Hashem niskasko evera Hashem nifsek achut shel cheder. You don't start thinking that maybe there's a serious problem with the behema, and therefore the behema is schlepping a foot. The behema is schlepping a foot, but that doesn't mean that the behema is a treif and doesn't require any special bdikas. Halacha Yud Aleph. Ganovim shegoin v'natloim umashlichim eisin lacheri adir. So they go into a pen where there's animals, and they throw the pen out behind the deer. In other words, in order to go ahead and steal the animals. So l'chura they threw it and it fell. We're not worried that maybe these animals that they threw caused risik ivarim. Because they're interested in stealing it and having benefit from it. That's talking about on its way out. However, they were already out and the Ganov and threw it back into the deer. So it depends why did they throw it back in the deer. If someone started coming, and therefore they didn't want anyone to catch them with the Geneva, and they just threw it back into the pen, it's cheshelim. So then we're cheshish that these kloim that they threw back in, they weren't careful how they threw it back because they were only trying to get rid of it. So we're worried maybe there was nisraski avera. However, machmas tshuva, if the reason why these Ganovim threw it back because they had a hitter tshuva and they decided to give it back, is then el cheshelim. Then we're not worried that there was nisraski avera. They'll also be careful. Halacha Yud Beis, Sher Shir Bitzul Shchitah, which they lie them down to Shecht, is Afal Pisha Nafal Nefila Gdela, Sheyesh Lokel Beishem Apil Nesei, is Ein Cheshele, we're not Cheshish, that there's a opinion of Nefil over here, and that Nesaska Echad Mevera, Neshaneas Tzipornov, Umeschazik At Mashamat Magir La'aretz. So notice he puts in his hooves, he takes his Tzipornaim, and he basically braces himself for the fall, and memela, so there's not going to be a problem with the fall. Alderech when the animal jumps itself, so alderech it's bracing itself for the fall. So alderech over here when it's bracing itself, ne'ez siparnav, it sticks in its nails on the schazek hachmagil aretz. Now hika habehema al reisha, v'hol chala hamaka klapis nov. You took a stick and you hit it on the head. And the stick extended until the tail. And it was a long stick, and it went over the back of the animal, either from the head towards the tail. Al klapi ratio, or the other way. You were standing with a long stick, and you hit it, but over the length of the animal on top. You clearly hit it with a stick over the entire spine in the length. However, if the mata has like chulias, like vertebrae, so to speak, sticking out, and those things sticking out of the mata which could cause damage to the shedra, is chayshel, then we are chayshish. So here it didn't reach the whole thing, and it was the tip of the mata reached part of the shedra. So here there's more of a concern that tip of the mata, when it reached part of the shedra, caused damage. Damage is chayshish. Is also cheshesh. It's not really clear. Are we cheshesh for risuk, or are we cheshesh that something happened to the shedra? I mean, we're learning over here. The halach is about nefula. So over here we were learning that when something a behemoth, something that was hit, So if it was hit, we're concerned that maybe something was shattered. Over here, we're saying that if you hit it on the back, we're not worried that something was shattered. But now we're saying if you hit it sideways, l'mashal, higia reisha matel mixas hashedra cheshen lo. V'chein mehika l'reichav hashedra is cheshen lo. What are we cheshish? L'chura we're cheshish for the shedra. We're not cheshish for the ivarim apnimim that maybe it was risuk. L'chura, I'm not sure. Halacha yudalit. Oif shenechbat al davar kosher. It got hit. It bumped into something very hard. Kigen krishel chitim, a pile of wheat kernels, a kupa shel shkeid mukiyetzdem, a box of almonds. Is chayshel risik ivarim, and it was flying, and it just banged into this type a hard pile. It's chayshel risik ivarim. However, v'nechbat al davar rach. Or vahateven or vahaefor, it banged into something soft which gives, is ein choshen. So now we're not choshish for risik ivar. So the whole time we're talking about the chash of risik ivar. That's what you would assume halacha Gimel is also talking about. Halacha tezvav nidbeku knofa bedevik b'shas seder v'neschabed. The seder was that they would put some devik, some glue, on a piece of wood, and then the bird would sit on it, stand on it, and then it would get stuck to it. So sometimes the knafayim, the wings, were also stuck. Now the behemoth, the bird wants to fly, so the bird tried to fly, and then it would fall together with the piece of wood. The wood was stuck to it; it couldn't really fly properly, and it would fall down. And there was a concern whether that's considered on a fuller. That's the same shaila, whether it would be on a fuller. Is nidbuku knafa bedevik b'shas seder. And when it's chabit, and as a result of that, it fell and it got banged. If it still has one free wing, is ein choshen. We're not choshish, because even though you can't fly properly with only one wing, but I'll call upon the wing, it gives him enough strength, enough flying power to be able to not fall with a bang, and therefore it's not going to be on a fuller. However, if the bird was caught with both wings and therefore he can't fly with either wing, and when the schabed begufe, and then he fell together with this piece of wood that it was on, and it fell begufe on the floor. So then it's cheshlei. So it was trying to fly, and it falls because it can't fly properly, because it's attached to this piece of wood and it doesn't have proper wings. So if it has at least one free wing, so it causes that it doesn't fall with a bang, and therefore there's no kshash. Halacha tezayin nechbat al pnei hamayim. It hit water, and as a bird, even if it hits water, there's a kshash of kavata. A behema, there's no kshash by water, but masha'inkin, a bird, since it's shvacher, so therefore there's a concern that if it hit the water, so maybe there's the risik ivarim just by hitting the water. So im shot maleki masim imata l'mayla l'umas hamayim. In other words, if it was continued swimming, and the length of the bird, and it was against the stream, and it was upstream, so then there's no kshashka. We see the bird is still swimming, just like before we had when the behemoth was the v'holcha. So Aldera is over here, the bird is swimming against the stream. Shot if it was swimming downstream, because we don't really know that it's giving any and is adding anything to the swimming. Maybe just the stream is taking it, because Shem Hamayim Heim HaMelich Meisei. However, you could see that it went ahead and quickly and it grabbed a piece of tevin, a piece of kasha. We see it's not just it's doing something. It's going. It's on its own initiative, grabbing a piece of tevin, a piece of kash. Is a shot machmasatzme, and therefore venchesh. So that's aldera v'haya mahalo. Just like by behemoth, if it fell and then it started walking, so we say the ein cheshonlei. So aldera is the bird is ein cheshonlei. So we learned kama dinim. The nekudas of the din is that if it was nafla 10 tvachim, and so sometimes it's ein cheshon because it was holcha. Mashenkin, if it wasn't holcha, it was just amda or other situation. So then we're concerned cheshonlei that maybe there's a risuk ivarim. And if there's a risik ivarim, that would make it into a treif. Now, kol mokim chalach yudzayin, kol mokim shamarno ein choshen lo. What does it mean? Muter lishchit miyad, ve'ein tzorich livdek shem and nisrasik ever. However, v'chol mokim shamarno choshen lo, im shochta, is Sorech Livdek Keneged Kolachol. So when you say Cheshla, first of all, you have to be Beidik the entire cavity of the Beima. Kolachol Kuli Mikot Kedaresh Adayerch. Imotze Batrefa Manatrefa Shemoninu. So then obviously it's a trefa. Oi, another option is shenisrasik evim in hayvarim shebifnim v'nifsed tzurasik. So either if you found a trefa and a trefa, so obviously it's a trefa. But here's a chiddush that even though you found an aver meivarim shebifnim which nifsed tzurasik is a rezu trefa v'afil nisrasik evim meivarim shem nitluk sheirek again tchel ukloyes. So even though the tchel was taken completely out, there wouldn't be a problem. Is nevertheless a rezu treifa. Because if it was taken out, there wouldn't be a problem. But if it fell, and that caused that the tchel or the kloy should be nisrasik, so that's a problem. Chutz mi beis harechem, except for the uterus, sheim nisrasik, if it fell and it was nisrasik, is a rezu muteres. So the male it comes out that all these things, in other words, the gather of choshen lamot means you have to be choshish whether it was nisrasik evarim. And if you and choshen you don't have to be choshish with nisrasik evarim. Question is, what happens if there's a din of ein choshen law, but on the other end you were beidik and you saw there was nisrasik evarim? Does that go into a gather of an afula? Whereas l'mashal we have the case right in the beginning. Halacha ches nofla behema. So that's harizu treifa. If it was nisrasik ivura, and what happens if it was nafla mimokim that's not govei asara, and lepel was nisrasik ivura? There's no chi of choshen. There the Rambam doesn't say choshish or not choshish. The Rambam says the fact if it was asara tvachim, so then it's harizu. That's called a shvura, and memel harizu treifa. And if not, not. So. The Pasha Mashmois over there, it sounds like that if it fell from a place that's less than 10, even if it's Nisrasik Ivura, it wouldn't be a treif. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's the din taka. That's the din. Like, we're learning over here. The Ram says, Behemshech, Hiko Isa Be'evani B'mata, B'ritzis Echem Ivura. That's also called a treif. That's also called a risuk Ivura, which causes a treif. And then the Rambam behemshech to that halacha, the Rambam says kama halacha is where we are choshish or not choshish. Okay, so when you say yeah choshish not choshish means you don't have to be beidik, and choshish means you don't have to be beidik. But over there it's not mukhrach if you don't have to be beidik. And lepel you found that it happened, so then could be that would also be a considered a treifa. I don't know. That's sort of birur. You have to be mavar. Halacha yudches. Even though we have to be beidik the entire mikot ad kafaregel, but nevertheless the simonim ain't tzrichim dikra. Bikan she'eina nefila mechasesem. This musig that the nefila should cause a psarisik evarim in the simonim, there's no such a thing. They don't need dikra. Now noflam and agag v'lei omda. Now there's a new dip. If noflam and agag v'lei omda, it fell 10 tvachim. And it wasn't even omd. If it was omd, it's tzricha. You have to be beidik it, and you have to be beidik whether or not it was nisrasik ivura. But nafla min agag v'lei omda, aser lishchitesa asher tisha mesles. You have to wait for 24 hours until it's still alive. V'imshochet b'teich zman zeh rezu treifa, even if you didn't find nisrasik ivura. However, k'sheshechetesa acher mesles is then a tzricha b'dika k'mei is nochmo. If there's a musik that it fell, that it falls, you don't have to be beidik b'chlal. You don't have to be beidik b'chlal. That's if it fell less than 10 tvachim, or if it was amda v'holcha, you don't have to be beidik at all. If it was amda v'lei holcha, so you have to be beidik. Masha'enken, if it was lei amda, so it's not going to help b'dika unless it first waited 24 hours and then it helps the b'dika. V'chein misha doris b'raglei alo'ef, esha dorsasi behema. The if is in a matzav is like in its death throes, and memela it looks like it's about to die. Is again, you can't go ahead and shech the if now and start being beidik. Then that's also in a matzav that bedika won't help. There's a madrega where you don't need bedika. There's a madrega where you need bedika, and bedika helps. There's a madrega where even bedika doesn't help. You have to wait for 24 hours, and only then will bedika help. Halacha chafalu. Simonim shenidaldu l'ruban treifa. Now, the simonim are usually attached to each other, and the simonim that became detached from each other is treifa. V'afilu shlei machmis tefila. Apparently, it's often that through the nefila, the simonim will be nidaldu, and that would be a treifa. But Lupel, this din of simonim shenidaldu is not because it was nidaldu as a result of is the nisrasik over there. The word is not the problem that was nisrasik. The problem that was nisrasik as a result of nefila. Mashenkin over here, simon the simonim shenidalgu is a problem in itself. The fact that they're separated from each other, that's also a treifa. Vafilu shalei machmis tefila. V'chein im niskaplu. Niskaplu means they were separated from their place on the neck. Nidalgula means they were separated from each other, and niskaplu means that they were separated from their connection to the neck. They were like folded over. And the problem by niskaplu is not because they are a treifa, but the different problem. Shari einon ruyin l'shchitah. That's only talking about the simonim, the place where you have to shechta. Avol nisparek reiv tarbetz haveshet min halechi. The tarbetz haveshet is the part on the veshet which is above the veshet. And that's like the entrance to the veshet. And they were separated from the jaw. Is areza muteres. Sheina tarbetz roy l'shchita k'mesha b'yarnu. And therefore, the fact that they're separated from the jaw is not really an issue. Those binigeh, the simonim, that was niskaplo, they were separated. So that's an issue because it's a different einon roy l'shchita when they're separated. Hashenkin, the tarbetz haveshet, which anyways is not gishaten. So therefore, there's no issue of the fact that they were separated from the lechi.